Hello. Okay, so how's everyone doing today? It seems like I've got a horrible feedback loop going here. I don't know if that's the fan from the computer. I'm gonna put my headphones here and see if that'll make it any better before we start our lecture. I don't know if that's the fan from the computer. I'm gonna put my headphones here and see if that'll make it any better before we start our lecture. I don't know if that's the fan from the computer. All right, so we definitely have our little fan problem fixed here. I'm going to give a couple minutes here to get myself together, and then we're going to move right ahead into this very interesting subject matter today. I was doing a little research recently, and it kind of hit me. You know, I'm really into this comparative religion kind of thing, right? Trying to find the very essence of what it is that we call religion. Where did this thing start? Where did these stories come from? It's always been fascinating to me. And I found this one story in particular always so fascinating. It's the story of Kingu. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, Kingu is can be synonymous with Prometheus, Ymir from the Nordic tradition, Typhon from the Greek tradition, Pangu from the Chinese, Tuisto from the Germanic or Teutonic mythologies, and we're going to touch on a little bit of all of these. What happens here is there's a creation myth that usually springs all of this about. In mythology, in religion, and for for the purposes of this lecture series, I'm going to be using Christianity, the Christian religion. I'm going to be using God as a character, just like the same as I would use Marduk or Enlil or Enki. Yahweh or Yahweh is going to be a character in this story, as same as Jesus or Aishwa. He will be a character in this story and not your classical Judeo-Christian God concept. So I just wanted to get that out of the way first and foremost. The first story that I wanted to get into was the story of the chaos monster and the sun god. It's always, and see, when we talk about mythology, we have a real problem because what happens is, you know, in our Judeo-Christian mindset, it's hard for us to think of what is nothingness, right? When we hear in the Bible, uh, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, you know, and the earth was a formless void, and stillness was on the face of the deep. That's the picture that we get when nothingness. We think of this swirling concoction of water and hydrogen and stars and all of this mass and elements. I mean, what can we not? How can we not think of that? Scientifically, Judeo in the Judeo-Christian context, that's kind of what we get. When we think of the origins in the Judeo-Christian framework, we think of the Big Bang, because that's what pretty much is described in Genesis. But we go a little bit farther back than that, and we find out that nothingness, and again, it's kind of hard to think of a concept of nothingness, because in philosophy there is no thing, there's no such thing as no thing. There's always a thing. There's no way you can possibly conceive of no thing. Because even if you're thinking of no thing, you're thinking of a thing. You're thinking of no thing. So with that concept in mind, we start to thinking about what is this nothingness that a lot of these cultures and a lot of these, ancient civilizations, what were they talking about when they talked about nothingness? What we find out is they were talking about chaos. They weren't actually talking about nothingness in itself. They're actually talking about chaos. Now, chaos has some personified forms. Chaos can just be, you know, that what it is. If you ever read I think his name is Taj Bey. He has a book called The Autonomous Zone, Chaos Theory Explained. It's a very good book. Hakim Bey. It's actually about this very thing, the autonomous zone, finding out that mind was there before physical, before corpore, there was ether. Before the ether, what was there? There was always ether. There was always the mind. There was always the thought that everything that is in existence would be in existence. And if there's a thought, there's an action. Therefore, chaos is that thought. Chaos is that overwhelming sea of quote unquote nothingness that is potential, pure energy and potential, unformed, as the Bible would call it, void and formless. But that's exactly what this is. Now, let's go into the story of Kingu. And I wanted to start with Kingu because he's one of the first, one of these first chaos monsters that we see being basically failed at the hand of the sky god, at the hand of the supreme ruler of the heavens and earth. There had to be a sacrifice. There had to be a blood atonement in a lot of these cultures. So what happens is, and a lot of the, and I'm going to speed through the Kingu myth, but basically, in a nutshell, if you read the Enuma Elish, which I've got a page pulled up here. The Enuma Elish, we'll go over it a little. Covered in 1849, fragmentary form, and it was first published in 1876. Now, this is one of the oldest manuscripts in human history. Now, the epic is one of the most important sources for understanding the Babylonian worldview. It covers 7 tablets and describes the creation of the world and the creation of man and how he is destined for the service of the Mesopotamian deities. Now, there's a little bit of controversy because what happens here in the Enuma Elish, they're actually praising Marduk. And Marduk is actually one of the, I guess you would call this, not one of the original gods of the Mesopotamian area. There was a god before then. In this area of the world, Assyria or Syria, that they praise the god Ashur. So why would they not be praising the god Ashur in this Babylonian creation myth? Well, because the god Marduk came and took over. Pretty much the same way that Zeus took over in Greece. Pretty much the same way that Ahura Mazda took over in late Iran and became the Avestan cult, or what we call I apologize. It's called the Avestan cult, or also what we call Zoroastrianism. So let's take a little deeper dive here into this Kingu myth, because what happens here is very interesting. Now, at the creation of the world, there are these 2 entities, and I'm just going to give you a brief synopsis because this is basically the same myth in every tradition that I'm going to go over it in. There are 2 creation entities. There's Tiamat and there's Apsu. And Apsu is this creator god, this god that is the father of all. Tiamat is actually the mother of all, the mother earth. Tiamat is actually what you would call the personification of the globe earth. The same way as in Greek culture you would call this force Gaia. And some people call it mother earth. Some people mirror each other. But here we are where Apsu is this great sky god of the whole universe. And Tiamat, the mother god, is his consort. They go together. They're together. The sky looks down upon the earth and they have children, right? These children are spread far and wide. Some of them are angelic, some of them are monstrous. What happens is a lot of these monstrous entities start to kind of doing a little bit things that people don't want them to do. So what Apsu does, there's too much going on. We have to figure out how to stop this down, because as the same as in Greek mythology or any other mythology, there's what's called theogony, and I'll go to that really quickly. I have that page pulled up. Theogony is basically what's called a secession myth, and a secession myth principally is where, let's go into Greek philosophy, into Greek mythology, and give you an example. We all know how Kronos overthrew Uranus. Uranus, the sky god, the heavenly sky god, the same as Apsu in the Sumerian myth. in the Babylonian myth. Now we have here how Kronos overthrew Uranus, and then how Zeus overthrew Kronos and his fellow Titans. We have the exact same thing happen in Mesopotamia almost 3,000 years earlier. So what happens is Kingu is basically this Typhon character in the Greek literature. What happens is Tiamat is upset. Gaia is upset. Mother Earth is upset. Her children are being killed. The secession, the theogony, the predetermined fixture of how the world and who's going to rule the universe, she's not happy with that. She's saying to herself, well, I don't care if Zeus is all powerful. I don't care if Marduk, in this case, in the Babylonian epic, it's Marduk. I don't care how powerful Marduk is. I want him gone. He has killed a lot of my children. He has killed my husband. Because that's what happens. When they succeed the former god, the former supreme ruler, they have to murder them. And it has to be a blood atonement. And mostly, it is a genitalial kind of castration that happens. I guess like if an emasculating, if you will, of the supreme god. And that kind of gives that blood sacrifice what it needs to make that new supreme god supreme. In this case, Marduk had become the supreme god. He had overthrown Apsu. Tiamat is upset. She has all of her children, and one of them happens to be Kingu. Kingu means unskilled laborer. Kingu is a monstrous beast with serpentine legs, and he's got wings, and he looks like a hawk in the face, and he is just this monstrous beast, and he was the last of Tiamat's children. Why? Because Tiamat did not have this child, Kingu, until after her husband Apsu had died. Now take a look at this. Think about this now. Well, how does this sound familiar? How does it sound familiar? A virgin birth, a birth of a child after the father has no touching, has nothing to do with it at all. Where have we heard that at before? So we get Kingu, the lover and the fool. Kingu is now Tiamat's consort, Tiamat's wife, Tiamat's husband rather. Now she wants to establish him as ruler of the gods. She wants to make sure that Kingu has everything that he needs to succeed, so she gives him the 3 tablets of destiny. And he wore those as a great breastplate, and it gave him great power. But you know what? It did not matter, because Marduk, pretty much the same as Zeus in the Greek literature, destroyed Kingu. Destroyed him. In some versions of the story, he is pelted with millions of thunderbolts until he is nothing but a quivering mass. And then what happens is they use his body and his blood to create the skies and the river. And it's a wonderful story. And we actually get a little bit deeper into it in another epic. That's how intertwined and interconnected these stories are. This one is, I like to think that this is the prototype. I like to think that this is one of the beginning stories of this nature, but I can't say that for 100%. This is the farthest back one that I could find. Now, I know that it feels like I have not given you the full story, but I will give you the full story, because trust me, these are all the same story. Let's go back. Let's go forward maybe 1,000 years. Let's go to a man we call Typhon, or a god, or a titan that we call Typhon. What we find here is that Typhon was, if we look here, a serpent-legged, winged deity that tried to take the throne away from Zeus. Where is that familiar? Right? We just heard that, right? But wait a minute. How are we finding Zeus fighting basically Kingu? Why? Because these are the same stories retold. These same stories. These stories did not get told until Homer and Tacitus wrote them down. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And this was thousands of years before these stories were first even told. So how do we get a Greek story that everyone knows, and how do we get a Mesopotamian story that nobody knows? Well, because the Mesopotamian story is incomplete. What authors and poets did over the years was they added to the story. They embellished the story just a bit to fit their Greek prototype. And what we have and what we find is the story of Typhon and Zeus. Now, what happens in the story of Typhon and Zeus? I will tell you pretty much the same exact thing. We talked out of thunder and lightning, right? Well, Gaia, the mother spirit, the Mother Earth, was so upset by this. She was so upset by this that she bore a son unto herself, right? What does this seem familiar? Where is this familiar? So what happens is, excuse me, Gaia bore this son, the last of her children, again. Monstrous creature with wings and snakes for legs, and one of the most powerful beings in existence that can. Now he goes to fight Zeus. Now this is where the story differs just a little bit. When he goes to fight Zeus, he actually succeeds just a little bit. He has Zeus pushed into a corner. On in every version of this story that I have heard, he definitely has not necessarily the upper hand, but he is right there along with Zeus until Zeus pulls out his last ditch effort and he hurls a million thunderbolts at this creature until he finally succumbs. And guess what happens? They use his body to form the earth. They use his body to shield the earth. They use his skull to form the vault of the heavens. Now we always have this story of where now we keep running into this story to where these gods, these demigods, these Mother Earth born creatures, their bodies are being used as a sacrifice to bring life. Because what happens here in the Kingu epic, after Kingu dies, they used, and we can see here, Kingu was eventually killed by Marduk. Marduk mixed Kingu's blood with the earth and used clay to mold the first human beings. While Tiamat's body creates bodies, forms the earth and the skies, Kingu's body was molded with clay to form the first human beings. Very, very similar to what's going on here in the Greek epic. I just want to stop a minute and say what's going on. Annette B, Marquise, what's good? What's good? What's good? Just a little lesson today. Just a little history today, man. I love it. Just trying to get a little bit in. You know, I love this kind of thing. So what happens now? We have this same exact myth, thousands of miles apart, thousands of years apart. But I'm going to blow your mind one more time. Who's heard of Ymir? Ymir is, in Nordic Teutonic mythology, what's called the first Jotun, or Jotunheim, or Jotnar. What is Jotnar? What is a Jotun? A Jotun is a giant. A Jotun is a creation, and he was the first one. Basically, I'll give you a brief synopsis of the Nordic myth of creation. What happens is there is this icy river that flows from the north, and it's ice and it's mist and it's barrenness and it's nothing but icy desert, right? And from this icy desert, from the steam, there forms a little trickle of steam and ice, and it's floating in through the nothingness. Again, we find this word nothingness, but there's not nothingness if there's something, right? So what we have again here is chaos, the chaos theory, the theory that everything is that will be. It just needs order, right? So what happens here? This icy river meets, and they call it Niflheim, to be exact. It meets, I'm going to have to research this. I apologize. Nordic mythology. When it comes to mythology, period, I really like Wiki. One of my favorites. All right, now here we are. Creation. Okay, I really just want to know the name of these two rivers. Oh, and we can't forget about Yggdrasil, the world tree. But the name of these two rivers are, and I really apologize, because I know the name. One of them's name is Jotunheim, meaning fire world, and one of them is Niflheim, meaning ice world. So what happens is these two worlds of fire and ice meet somewhere in the middle, and there's steam formed, and from this steam, water forms. And that's another very important element to all of these creation stories: water and chaos. We'll get into that in another episode. But for right now, these water droplets form, right? And from these water droplets continue to freeze and melt and freeze and melt until one point they melt and give way to a man figure. This is Ymir. This is Ymir. Now, in some versions of the epic, there's also a cow, the sacred cow. Now, the sacred cow in some versions of the epic was created first, and he licked salt away from the surrounding ice. And when he licked this salt away from the surrounding ice, he uncovered Ymir. So there is a little bit of controversy as to which came first, the cow or the man, the sustenance or the ones that needs the sustenance. But as you can see from the depiction here, every version of the epic has it to where the cow of heaven, the great cow of heaven, nurses Ymir. Now Ymir starts to get sweaty, and from his drops of sweat under his underarm fall the first man and woman. Why do we keep getting these epics, these stories of these gods or these titans' bodily fluids being so potent that whatever they touch can cause life? Well, we have the same story in the Judeo-Christian Bible. God's breath, God's touch can cause life. Thank you so much, Marquise. I think I like it too. So let's go back a little bit here. Let's talk about this Ymir fellow. We've talked about Kingu, the lover and the fool. We've talked about Typhon, the lover and the fool. Well, we can't put Ymir into this same category, but we can say that Ymir is one of these gods that had to be sacrificed in order for what we know as the world to form. His chaos formed order. And who was the orderer? In this story, in particular from the Prose Edda, and if you know anything about Norse mythology, you know there are various sources that you can go to. You've got the Prose Edda, the Poetic Eddas, all of these different Scandinavian myths that go back thousands of years. But this one in particular, the Prose Edda, the story goes that the brothers Odin, Vili, and Ve. Now, where did these brothers come from? I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Okay. What did these gods come from? Search that a little bit more deeply. I really apologize about that. If I don't know something, I will find out for you later. And the thing is, I do know this, but it's been so long since I have read and understood this literature. This is what this is for you and for me. I'm learning just as well as you are. But long story short, Ymir is this giant primeval god, right? And from his bodily fluid springs people, other gods, right? And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Odin, Vili, and Ve are some of these gods that personified out of the flesh, right? Well, Odin, Vili, and Ve, for whatever reason they decided to kill Ymir, and they did kill him, and they pushed his body into a chasm in the middle of Jotunheim and Niflheim, right? And they formed it into a ball, and his blood they turned into the sea. His flesh they turned into mountains. His teeth they turned into gravel, right? All of these stories have such familiar tenets. Why is that? Why is that? And everybody will tell you that, oh, well, these are totally different religions. These are totally different. And I do call them religions because some people still do believe these things. We call it a myth. A myth usually is defined as something that is not true, something that, cannot be quantified, cannot be qualified. So we call it a myth. But for these intents and purposes, Christianity is a myth. Islam is a myth. We can't justify any of these things. We can't, we can't really, prove any of these things. So all of these things are myths. So one person's myth is another person's religion, in my book. With that being said, why do all of these myths have such similar characteristics? And I'll tell you why. It's a word called Euhemerism. And I haven't used this word in a long time, and I hope I'm using it right. But what happens is Euhemerism is an approach to the interpretation of mythology in which mythological accounts are presumed to have originated from real historical events or personages. For instance, when we talk about Nimrod, which we will get into that in a little bit, the city of Nimrud, which is actually one of the cities that he founded. We'll get into that a little bit later. But when we talk about Nimrod, we talk about this mighty man of renown, this hunter, this great hunter in the earth, as the Bible calls him, and how he went out to found cities east of Ashur and what they call Rehoboth and Kala and all of these places, right? Well, we can take a look at these places scientifically and see, who was the originator of these people. There is a succession of kings. They have it on clay tablets. I'm not going to show that to you. But what happens is one of these kings, one of these people, did some miraculous shit. They came up with some great stuff. That, the person that the Enuma Elish was written for, the person that the Epic of Gilgamesh is written for, Gilgamesh himself, Enkidu. These might have been actual real people that were Euhemerized, or what they call deified. If you look into, there's a place in Washington, D.C., where you can see a portrait of George Washington. And they call it the deification of Washington. And what happens is you see him rising in this all-white gown, this portrait of George Washington, first president, if you believe that. And he's rising in this white gown and his arms outstretched in this Christ-like figure. And basically what this is in a Freemasonic, in a secret society, in a esoteric sense, is his deification, his show to the world that now I am a god. Years and years from now, 1,000 years from now, if someone finds this painting with no historical context, they would think George Washington was a god. And this is what Euhemerism is. Now let's get back off of that for just a second. We're going to go back to Ymir for just a second. Then we're going to go to a little bit to the east. We're going to talk about Pangu in China, and we're going to talk a little bit more about. We have Kingu, we have Typhon, we have Ymir. Let's see if we can find one more. Tuisto. Tuisto is the legendary divine ancestor of the Germanic peoples. Wow, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Who are the Germanic peoples? Let's look at a map of what they call the Germanic peoples. Now, anything here in yellow, it says here in the Latin, this is the territory appropriate of the prime Roman Empire and the conquest of the Ottoman Empire, all in the yellow. My Latin is not that great. But what we're looking at here is what they called the Germanic world, Germania. We see it here, if you can see my scroller here. Gallia, we have Hispania over here, and this is really not Hispania. This is what we call the Maghreb, Al-Andalus, where the North Africans took over this place, and they called themselves the Moors, if I'm not mistaken. And they took over this place, hundreds of years before this even happened. But apparently there was a culture hero in the Germanic time frame, and they called him Tuisto. And I found this very interesting because what a lot of people are saying here is etymologically there are connections that give him comparisons to the Norse mythology. Etymologically, he is connected with Ymir. Let's actually read two primary variant readings of the name. The most frequently occurring Tuisto is commonly connected to the Proto-Germanic root tu and its derivative tis, twice or double, thus giving Tuisto the core meaning double. Any assumption of a gender inference is entirely conjectural, as the tis roots are the roots of number of concepts and words in Germanic languages. For instance, the Germanic twist, which in all but the English has the primary meaning of dispute, conflict. The second variant of the name, occurring originally in the manuscript E, reads Tuisco. One proposed etymology for its variant reconstructs. One proposed etymology for its variant reconstructs a Proto-Germanic Tuisco and connects this with Proto-Germanic Tiwaz, meaning son of Tua. This interpretation would thus make Tuisco the son of the sky god, Dias, and the earth goddess. Now, okay, here we're getting somewhere. Connections have been proposed between the first century figure of Tuisto and the hermaphroditic primeval being Ymir. I didn't even know he was hermaphroditic, but that's very interesting because we're going to go into that in the Chinese literature in just a second, how this being was hermaphroditic as well. Ymir in later Norse mythology. Right? So this is actually before the Norse mythology was written down. Attested in the 13th century sources, based upon etymological and functional similarity, Meyer sees the connection as so strong that he considers the two to be identical. While mindful of the possible semantic connection between Tuisto and Ymir, notes an essential functional difference. While Ymir is portrayed as essentially negative figure, Tuisto is described as being celebrated by the early Germanic people in song, with Tacitus reporting nothing negative about Tuisto. Let's read here where it says theories and interpretations. Tacitus reports falls squarely within the ethnographic tradition of the classical world, which often fuses anthropogeny, ethnogeny, and theogony together with a synthetic whole into a synthetic whole of the myth. Myths have been theorized as ultimately or originated in the Proto-Indo-European society around 2000 BC. According to Reeves, 1999, the fact that the ancient Germanic people claims descent from earth-born gods was used by Tacitus to support his contention that there were an indigenous population, the Latin word indigena, which often used in the same sense as the Greek autochthonous, meaning literally born from the land itself. Lindar notes that although this claim is to be judged as one made out of a simple ignorance of the fact, now they're saying that this is wrong. I say, what else can you call this? Now we're going to get into one more, and then I'm going to let you guys go. I really appreciate you guys being here today. Marcus, as you said earlier, yes, there is a new twist to the content coming off the channel. I was a little bit late today. I was supposed to go in at 4:30, but I missed this. And the content is going to get even better because actually tomorrow I am purchasing some new equipment, new computer, new headphones, new microphone, new interface, new everything is going into this system tomorrow to replace everything that I have lost, as I call through the wire. So if you guys want to help out with that, the donation links are right below. If you want to reach out and contact the show, the donation links are right below. This is going to be a really good show coming up. We're going to be doing these study sessions a lot more because this is what we need. I know I built this channel off of doing Nature Boy commentary, and I still will be doing that from time to time. But this is what we need. This is what we need. Whether you unsubscribe, I don't care. Whether you like it or not, this is what we need. This is what I will be doing. Now, this story is very weird. I'm going to actually just read this story, and I'm going to leave it right there for you guys to put your interpretations together. We've given you already Kingu. We've given you already Typhon. We've given you already Tuisto. We've given you Ymir. All have very similar stories. This one not so similar, but we're going to go into it just a little bit to show you how closely this one follows the Ymir story and how things evolve over time. So what happens here? In the beginning, there was nothing in the universe except for a formless chaos. The chaos coalesced into a cosmic egg, and we'll definitely talk about these cosmic eggs in another series as well, for about 18,000 years. Within it, the perfectly opposed principles of yin and yang became balanced. Now, what were we talking about during this whole thing? We're talking about chaos and who orders it. Chaos and who orders it. There is no thing as nothing. There's no such thing as no thing. There's only chaos. And how do you order chaos? And a lot of these very ancient, especially Eastern texts and mythologies come with something called the cosmic egg, and we definitely have to talk about this. The cosmic egg, water, and chaos. That might actually be the next show. But what happens is this chaos coalesced into a cosmic egg for about 18,000 years. Within it, the perfectly opposed principles of yin and yang became balanced, and Pangu emerged, or woke up from the egg. Pangu is usually depicted as a primitive, hairy giant who has horns on his head and wears fur. Pangu became creating the world. He separated yin from yang with the swing of his giant axe, creating the earth, murky yin, and the sky, clear yang. To keep them separated, Pangu stood between them and pushed up the sky. With each day, the sky grew 10 feet, and the earth grew 10 feet thicker, and Pangu 10 feet taller. This task took another 18,000 years. In some versions of the story, Pangu is added in his task by four most prominent beasts, namely the turtle, the kiln, the phoenix, and the dragon. I have no idea what a kiln is, so we're going to look at it real quick. So this is a kiln. It is a Japanese mythical hooved chimerical creature. Okay, so this is elapsed. Pangu died. His breath became the wind. Now look at this. Watch again how parts of his body become parts of nature. His breath became the wind, mist and clouds. His voice became the thunder. His left eye the sun, and his right eye the moon. His head the mountains and the extremes of the world. His blood rivers. His muscles fertile land, and his facial hair the stars in the Milky Way. His fur bushes and forests, and his bones valuable minerals. His bone marrow sacred diamonds. His sweat rain, and the fleas on his hair, on his fur, carried by the wind and became animals. These are some very interesting stories. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into them. I don't want to keep you guys very long today. Like I said, this is just an introductory series on this. We're going to be digging a lot deeper, and we're going to be going a lot longer. I really appreciate everybody who did show up. Like I said, like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, comment. That helps out the channel a lot. If you would like to donate, I am making some big purchases tomorrow. So if you want to help out with that, please do. The links are below. I'm going to get out of here until next time, guys. Thank you again so much for being here. Let's learn together.